Hello, I'm Larry Huddon, and I'm a designer. I have been designing for over 50 years. I think 54. February will be 55 years. So it's been a long time. I started when I was 18 years old. And when I go back through those years and think of myself at 18 years old, the circumstances of my going to work were that my father had passed away. I had always been interested in drawing, but jewelry had never entered my mind ever. And once I got, my father had passed away, my mother and I had gone to apply for jobs at a big company in Providence, Rhode Island, which was called Coro Incorporated. The company, we felt, was something that we had to eat, so we had to work. So fortunately, both her and I both got a job the same day. And I was a stock boy and working with the jewelry, and all I had to do was take boxes that were filled with containers to the ladies who had trays full of jewelry, and they would take the jewelry and put it into the boxes. And the one thing that I do remember most of all about that period of time was not the fragrance, because the fragrance is like a flower, but it was the smell of the glue and the jewelry. It had a unique smell, and I love the smell of the jewelry. And at lunchtime, when I used to have lunch, I was always making little sketches of little monsters, little creatures that I used to like to draw. And everybody was intrigued by what I used to do. And there was one young guy that came along and says, "Gee, you should be a jewelry designer." And I looked at him saying, "What do you mean jewelry designer?" I said, "What's a jewelry designer?" I didn't have the slightest idea that jewelry was designed. It never entered my mind. So he says, "Oh, you can become a jewelry designer. You draw very well." So I ended up, he says, "You know what I'll do?" He says, "I'll try to arrange a meeting so that you can meet someone in the art department of the company. This is a big company. They need people like you who can draw very well." So it ended up where on the following day or 2 days later, I got to meet with one of the head designers. And I brought portfolios, and there was one portfolio of pretty pictures of boats and people's faces and airplanes and trees and flowers and stuff like that. My other portfolio was monsters. I drew all monster faces and different caricatures, and I was kind of ashamed of those. I wasn't very proud of those, because I remember in high school my teachers used to tell me when I drew these things, "Stop wasting our paper." So I felt bad about that. But in the end, when I went to see the first man, I didn't show the monsters. I showed only the nice pictures. And he looked, he went through everything, and he says, "Oh, okay, if we need someone, we'll call you. We'll let you know. Leave your number, telephone number, stuff." So I walked away kind of dejected. I felt sad that I didn't get a job being a designer. And I guess it happens to a lot of people the same way. But after I left, I met the same friend, and he said, "How'd you make out?" I said, "Well," the guy said he'll call me. He says he didn't need anybody at the moment, and he'll call me when he needs somebody. He says, "Did you show him the monster pictures?" I said, "No, I didn't show him. Why didn't you show the monster pictures?" He says, "You know, there's another designer that," he says, "I think you should meet. It's a Russian designer." He says his name is Sergei Kuchkin. And he says, "I want you to meet him." He said, "I'm going to go and see him. I'm going to ask him to take the time for a few minutes to just look at your artwork." So the next day I come, he planned it for lunchtime. I come at lunchtime. I met Sergei. He is coming through the door with his coat on. This is in February. And I remember because I guess it was the end of February. It was winterish kind of weather. And the young man stopped him and said, "Wait, Sergei, you said you would see this young man." And I never thought that this kid could be that powerful or have that much influence. But he turned Sergei around. Sergei went back in the office, and he said, show me what you have." And I took out my flower book, and I handed it to him. And my friend poked me with his elbow. He says, "Show me the other one, not that one." And so I had to give the monster pictures. And Sergei had his hat and his coat on. He takes his hat off, he puts it on the desk. He takes his coat off when he opened the portfolio. He put it on the desk, and he called over the top of these glass petitions. He says, "Guys, come here and look what kind of nightmares this kid has." So they came over, and they looked and all laughed because of all the funny faces and stuff I had drawn. And he suddenly opened the drawer, and he dug down into the drawer, and he pulled this design out. It wasn't as much nicer than this, but that was the drawing that I was asked to copy. That's the drawing that made me go from a stock boy to an apprentice designer. And you never know what's going to happen. There's always a surprise all the time. So I ended up working for 4 years as an apprentice. And unfortunately, the Army got me, and I had to go in the Army. But guess what my job was in the Army? Illustrated draftsman. I got to draw again. So I was drawing jewelry in Alaska, when I was stationed in Alaska, sending it back to Rhode Island. I was getting more money paying freelance and just freelance designer from the Army, and I was making more money with the jewelry than I was making in the Army. So it went on like that for the 2 years of my life, and then I got out and went to California. I had been dating a girl back home that I knew, and I couldn't get her out of my mind, and I went to see her. She was living in California. My sister found out her address where she lived, and this is how we met. And I got to go through Hollywood and through the areas of Wilshire Boulevard and famous areas of the jewelry for Rodeo Drive, and met jewelry companies. And I did some freelance work in California as well and got paid for it. So my career was really, I was on the road that I was meant to be on. By that time, I stayed there a few weeks. I spent all my Army separation pay with my future wife, and we did end up getting married later on, about 6 months later, and I got a job, and I've been on this road since that time in 1964 without stopping. I started in 1958 at Coro as a stock boy, coming back in '64 as a designer apprentice, and I continued designing. Not an apprentice, I was a designer at that time, and I wasn't looked at as an apprentice any longer. I was proficient, I had good ideas, and it was imagination. I had a good imagination. There are stories about that as well in my imagination with my dad, and him drawing lines, and my drawing lines as a little boy, and him making pictures out of those little lines that he made me draw. And I picked up the same thing and did the same thing with my children. But at this point, I started to grow very fast, and working for a major company. I got out of the Army, and I lined up a job with Trafari, worked with Trafari for 6.5 years through Rappaport Company in Attleboro, Massachusetts. Worked the first lines of Avon, worked with Sarah Coventry in designing for them, and ultimately kept growing. I freelanced from after Rappaport. I left there after a period of time and just went freelancing, and I just worked for about 13 companies at one time. It was non-stop designing, that's all I ever did. And I ended up getting a position working with on a freelance basis again in Louisiana for a company called Stoller Settings, and I worked and designed rings for them and at Stoller. And one day someone said, "Would you like to go to Thailand?" And I said, "Wait, what do you mean Thailand?" They said, "Well, there's someone that's looking for a designer, and they would like to interview you." So I got to meet the people from Pranda, and I ended up in Thailand and working with them. And it's been a love affair ever since. I'm here in Thailand. I love Thailand. I like working in Thailand. And I now want to, at this point in my life, start to share all the experience that I've earned over all the years that I've been designing on all the different projects, so that I can give it to and pass it on to somebody else. So this is why I'm doing this blog. I think that by my giving to you, it's making me thankful to my creator who gave me my skills, that I should pass it on to someone else before it's too late. 72 is the time to start giving back, and I think that's what I want to do now.